Hello everyone, you're watching the channel Stories of Our Life. Friends, make yourselves comfortable. I wish you to truly enjoy listening to this life story.
Judy didn't know how long she had been unconscious. When she woke up, she discovered that her phone was dead because the battery had drained from endless calls. She couldn't get up for a long time, her head was spinning so intensely. She felt so unwell that she couldn't even speak. Naturally, she didn't go to work the next day either. Judy didn't care, she wanted to attend Terry's funeral, but she didn't know where or when it would take place. Terry's best friend didn't answer her calls, and his parents wouldn't tell her anything, that was for sure. Judy was fired from the workshop, but she didn't react at all. She barely ate or drank. She was almost dying of grief, and sometimes it felt like she was truly dying. And then Judy discovered that she was pregnant. It was just a few weeks before she came to the upscale neighborhood to look for work. Of course, she immediately wanted to tell Terry's parents about the pregnancy. She wanted to bring them joy, knowing that they would have a grandchild. She wanted to tell them that their son left behind a legacy. But they didn't want to listen to her. As soon as Terry's mother heard about the pregnancy, she attacked Judy. "You monster! You whore! Who are you for us to believe you? Did you want to claim something that doesn't belong to you? I don't believe that you're pregnant with my son's child. It can't be true. You deliberately dated men to get impregnated by one of them. And now you want to pass off your bastard as my son's child, as our grandchild? It won't work for you." But It's not like that. Believe me. I was already pregnant before Terry's death. It's his child. I haven't been with anyone else before Terry, and there was no one after him. How can you say such things about me? Judy tried to defend herself. No, shut up. I don't believe you, you fraud. If you manage to deceive my son, it won't work with me. I know what you had in mind, you wanted to marry into a wealthy family and made up all this, lied to my foolish son. May he rest in peace, he believed you, poor thing. But I don't believe it. You probably had a bunch of men. I'm sure you don't even know who the father of the child is. Leave. Get out, so I never see you again. I'll call the police. If you don't leave, you murderer and deceiver, get out quickly. I'll tear you apart right now. Terry's mother screamed. Judy realized that she wouldn't be able to prove anything. They would never believe her, they would never accept Terry's child, and they couldn't help her. Once again, she was abandoned by everyone, but now she wasn't alone. Now she had her child with her, quietly growing inside her womb. A child from her beloved man, a child from Terry. For several days, Judy stayed at home, not thinking about anything, not planning anything. She barely ate, and then she woke up as if she had been released from a nightmare that surrounded her from all sides. She realized she didn't want to be like this. She shouldn't despair and waste away slowly. She had to live for her child. She had to give birth to him. Terry's child was the best thing he could give her. He had left, leaving her the most precious gift he could. He gave her a part of himself, and now that piece would always be with her. No one else wanted to be a part of this child's life. His grandmother and grandfather had rejected him. Well, Judy would handle it herself. She wouldn't allow this child to experience the same fate she had when she was born. She would never abandon him like her own mother did to her. She would raise this child, nurture him, and give him everything she possibly could. And most importantly, she would give him her love. She would love him deeply, and she would manage. She had to succeed. Judy fell silent. Robert looked at her attentively. This girl had gone through such a tragedy. She had been unhappy since birth, yet she still smiled and believed in better things. How touching it was. I lost my job at the studio. I went there to apologize, to ask them to take me back, but they wouldn't even listen to me. They kicked me out, told me never to set foot there again. I realized I needed to do something. When I give birth, I'll have to stay at home, and I'll need something to live on. So, I decided to take on some side jobs while I still can. Thank you for not abandoning me, for helping me even though you didn't know what I would do. If it weren't for you," Judy said quietly. Robert didn't reply, he just sighed. They remained silent for a couple of minutes. It had been a long time since something touched his soul as deeply as Judy's sad story did. Robert was deeply moved. "It's very sad. I'm sorry that you lost your beloved. I, too, lost a woman whom I loved very much," he said. "You know, in some ways, you remind me of her. You have the same sorrowful look as she did. Sometimes she looked at me like she carried some pain within her but couldn't tell me about it. I could never get used to it until the end of her days. I guess it was just a unique gaze. It seemed like she was always restless inside." Judy sighed. "How did you lose her?" Robert closed his eyes and answered softly, "Illness took her away. She had brain cancer. You know, sometimes I thought that she thought too much about herself, about something. I think that's what destroyed her. A person shouldn't carry all the things that trouble them inside. And she, apparently, was troubled all the time. I just don't know what it was." They fell silent for a while longer, and then Robert looked at her with interest. "You know, I really like you. You're a good employee, an honest girl. And I really want to help you. I'll give you money so that you don't have to work, live in your own room, and have enough for the time after the baby is born. I want to take care of you. You exhaust yourself, working tirelessly. You're always on the go, and it's not good for you. I understand that you're trying to forget your sorrow, but you need to think about the baby. I want to take care of both of you. I have the means to do so." But Judy shook her head, extending her hands forward. "No, that's out of the question. I can't take advantage of your kindness. I have no right to it. You've helped me so much already. I don't know what the reason is, but I believe you're a good person, and I'm so lucky to have met you, Robert. But just taking money like that, no, it's unacceptable. If you want to get rid of me, just say it. I won't hold it against you, I'll just leave. I'll find another job. We can't waste time. And if you don't mind, I'd like to stay and work for you as long as I have the strength." Robert took her hand. "What are you saying, Judy? Have I ever hinted that I want to kick you out? Have I told you to leave? Of course, live here and work, but please take care of yourself. I won't forgive myself if something happens to your child. You have to protect him. I'm sorry that you don't want to take the money. It's a shame. I genuinely want to help, but it's up to you. But let me tell you one thing, if I see you running around with a rag from morning till night again, then I will definitely kick you out. My house already shines with the cleanliness you bring here every day. You don't need to clean every day. It's unnecessary." Judy smiled shyly and nodded uncertainly. Since then, Robert became even more careful with Judy. Yes, she listened to him. She didn't clean as often, but she still found things to do. In the end, Robert took extreme measures. He bought a sewing machine, various fabrics, and accessories, everything necessary for cutting and sewing. One could say that with all these purchases, a small workshop could be opened. Everything was delivered to his house, and after thinking it over a bit, he set up a workspace for Judy in one of the rooms on the second floor. So that you don't run around all the time with a rag, it's better to get busy with something. Sew yourself some clothes or come up with something for your little one. I believe you'll find something to occupy yourself with, right? Robert said to her. Robert, I don't even know what to say. Why are you doing all this for me? What have I done to deserve all this? But Robert simply waved it off. I beg you, get busy with something, or you've already exhausted me. You're constantly flitting before my eyes with that rag. Robert couldn't explain to himself why he was doing all this for her, why she evoked paternal feelings in him that he had never suspected before. She suited him as a daughter. There was no talk of any attraction. He was married to Alice, who was the same age as this girl, Judy. But Judy, she didn't interest him as a woman, even though she was very beautiful. She evoked in him a feeling of pity, a desire to protect her from harm. Judy started to engage not only in household chores but also in sewing. She began to smile more often. Robert enjoyed watching her. She looked slightly happier, as if he had fulfilled her long-awaited wish. She sewed very quickly. When she showed him the results of her work, Robert was amazed. She truly knew how to sew. Everything turned out great for her. Time passed, and Judy's belly began to show. Robert had become so accustomed to her presence in his home that he couldn't imagine how he had lived without her help for so long. Moreover, she was a good conversationalist, and they could talk about life. Although she hadn't seen much within the walls of the orphanage, she was very well read. Her love for reading came in handy. She had a good memory and remembered everything she had read. Robert continued to take care of her. He treated her to sweets, fruits, and even took her to the doctor for prenatal checkups. Judy was shocked by such care. She would have never thought she could meet such a kind person. After meeting Terry's parents, Judy was convinced that all rich people were mean and cruel, but Robert was not like that. On the contrary, he was kind and caring. She felt sorry for him that his married life turned out the way it did. At one point, he even told Judy about Alice, and she genuinely couldn't understand how someone could willingly leave such a person as him. You know, maybe I have no right to say this, but your Alice is a real fool. You loved her, took care of her, and she treated you so badly, ungrateful, Judy said, and then regretted opening her mouth. She had no right to speak to her employer like that, and she was afraid he would get angry. But Robert didn't get angry, he just chuckled quietly. Maybe she is a fool, but that's even better. Then I didn't lose anything when she left. On the contrary, I'm lucky it happened now, not later when I would have been even more devastated. Everything happens at the right moment, and people meet for a reason. So, it should be like this, and when nothing happens, it's just that, Robert said. So, we met each other not by chance, right? You saved me, and I will never forget that. I will always be grateful to you because you brought me back to life, Judy replied. A few days later, Robert's best friend, Chris, came to visit him. They had been friends for a long time, ever since they met in university, and they had always stayed in touch. Currently, Chris lived in another country. He had come back home 2 months ago. For over a month, Chris had been dealing with his own problems. The men occasionally spoke on the phone, and finally, they found time for a personal meeting. Robert anticipated a pleasant evening that, he was sure, would last until morning. He and Chris could never agree on things. The meeting was warm and lively. Chris teasingly remarked that Robert had aged, and Robert told Chris that he would soon have a completely bald head. After laughing their fill at each other, they had dinner and then moved to the living room with glasses and a bottle of good whiskey. Chris was telling Robert about his life abroad and complaining about how much he missed his home country, while Robert told Chris about Alice, who had treated him so cruelly. You should have taught that scoundrel a lesson. It's not like you to turn a blind eye to it, Chris said. Robert sighed and replied, I guess I'm getting old. You know, I wasn't even eager to get involved with her. It was only after she ran away that I realized how difficult it was for me with her, very difficult. Yes, thanks to her, I bought this house, but I don't regret that. But she didn't fit into my pace of life, she was different. I hoped that we would have more points of connection when I married her. I thought she would give me a child, but that miracle didn't happen. I've already filed for divorce. At first, I thought she would come running back, crawl on her knees, I even hoped for that. I would have taught her a lesson, but then I realized that I didn't want that. Why do I need all those unnecessary fights and scandals? And who do I want to prove all this to? Myself? I don't need that anymore. It's good that she so successfully rid me of her company. After all, at my age, you can't have such a young wife. Of course, I don't plan to get married again, but if I do, it will only be to a woman slightly older and with brains, not sawdust in her head. Chris looked closely at his friend and squinted. I haven't seen you in a long time. I can tell that you've changed. Something has changed in you, I just can't figure out what exactly." A moment later, Judy entered the room. She brought ice and napkins. "Shall I bring clean glasses, Robert?" she asked. Robert smiled and shook his head. "No, Judy, it's fine. Go rest. I won't need you anymore tonight. If anything, call me." "I'm still awake," Judy replied and left. Chris observed Robert attentively, who had a slight smile on his face as he watched Judy. When Judy left, Robert continued to gaze at the door for a few more seconds. Chris burst into laughter. Robert looked at his friend with bewilderment. "And what does that mean? What made you laugh like that?" Chris shook his head, still chuckling. After a while, he calmed down and said with a smile, "Well, you just gave yourself away. You say you won't marry an older woman? Well, keep spinning your tales, but I can see what's happening right under my nose." Robert furrowed his brow and grumbled, "What do you mean?" Chris took a sip of whiskey and asked, "How long has this girl been working for you? Isn't she the reason you forgot about Alice? Isn't she the reason you filed for divorce? It seems to me that you'll be getting married again soon." "What do you mean, getting married? What are you talking about, Chris? Are you out of your mind?" Robert protested. Chris pointed a finger at Robert and threatened, "I see through it all. Her baby bump is already visible. You can say it's just her body type, but I saw how you looked at her belly, and it all became clear to me. You can deceive anyone, but not me. You wasted no time, huh?" "Oh, Robert, aren't you ashamed?" Robert shook his head and smiled. "Chris, you've misunderstood everything. You're right, she's pregnant, but I have nothing to do with this girl's pregnancy. However, you're right that I care about her, not just as an employer," and Robert proceeded to tell Chris everything that had happened. He briefly recounted Judy's story, which he had heard from her, and told his friend that he cared deeply about her fate, as if she were his own family, and that he felt terribly sorry for her because she had no one. As Robert told the story, Chris became increasingly serious. When Robert fell silent, Chris sighed and shook his head. "Yeah, old man, you're right about that. I feel sorry for this girl myself. That's how life goes. I think she deserved to meet you after all her suffering and losses. You're like a savior to her. And I understand why you care so much about her. She looks at you as if she worships you. I understand that she never had anyone who cared for her like that. Her deceased boyfriend doesn't really count, they had nothing except a close bond and dreams of marriage and a shared future. They never even lived together. They just wanted to be together, and that's where it all ended. But you showed genuine care, and she has never felt such care before. Poor thing, I feel sorry for her. She's in for a tough time." Robert paused for a moment and then said quietly, "Even when she gives birth, I won't abandon her. Chris, I'll come up with something to help her. I'll make her take the money. I'll help her." Chris stared at his friend for a long time, and then Robert said to him, "Let's change the subject, talk about something pleasant. We have so little time, we need to make the most of it." And they started talking about something else, then went to sleep. They went to bed around 3 in the morning, and by noon, Chris had already left. After the conversation with Chris, Robert started thinking more and more about how he could help Judy. Another thought settled in his mind: if his friend thought that Judy was pregnant with his child, others might think the same. And Judy looks at him with particular naivety. If she finds out that people will start gossiping about her, she will be terribly upset. Robert concluded that as soon as her belly became noticeably large and it would be better for her not to work anymore, many people would come to his house, workers and staff, and someone would definitely see a pregnant girl at his house. If they found out she was living with him, they would assume he was the father of the child. It's better to protect Judy from gossip. It leads to nothing good. And he decided that he would provide her with everything she needed and send her money, helping her however he could. But soon she wouldn't be able to work for him anymore. Robert hadn't told Judy about this yet, he decided he would tell her soon. And then something happened that changed all his plans. One day, Judy knocked on his office door to show him the clothes she had sewn for her future child. As she leaned over his desk, Robert noticed a black string around her neck. There was some sort of pendant hanging from the string. At first, he didn't pay much attention to it, but then he realized that the pendant was antique and looked like it could be made of gold. "Did Terry give you this?" he asked. Judy looked at him confusedly, and he nodded toward the pendant. Judy immediately took hold of the pendant, clutching it in her fist. Her face became serious, and she blushed slightly. "No, it's not from him. It's from my... You know, I rarely wear it. Sometimes, when I'm in a good mood, I put it on. But usually, it just lies there unused. Many times, I wanted to throw it away when anger overwhelmed me, but something always held me back, as if my heart knew that I needed it. Although my mind understands that it's useless, unfortunately." Robert looked at Judy with bewilderment. He didn't understand what she was talking about. "It's the only thing I have left from my mother. When I turned 18, they gave it to me. They said that this pendant was around my neck when I ended up in the orphanage. I don't know how it happened or why no one took it off, or why they kept it, I don't know, but this pendant belonged to my mother." "How do you know it's your mother? Where does this certainty come from?" Robert asked. Judy opened her palms and looked at the pendant. "Because there's a photo of a girl inside this pendant. I'm sure, that it's my mother. I feel it in my heart." Robert widened his eyes. "You never told me that you have a photo of your mother." Judy sighed. "I actually don't consider her my mother. I refer to her as the woman who gave birth to me." Robert remained silent for a moment, then asked, "Will you show it to me?" Judy nodded. She took the pendant off Judy's neck, and she handed it to Robert. He held the pendant in his hand and gently opened its compartments. When he saw the small photo inside, a shiver ran down his spine. He held his breath, afraid that if he didn't, he would scream. And he didn't want to scream. He didn't want to scare Judy, and he didn't want her to suspect anything. He didn't understand it himself, and he wouldn't be able to explain it to her. He exerted all his strength to remain indifferent to what was happening. He examined the photograph for several minutes. His hands trembled, and he hoped that it wasn't too noticeable and that Judy wouldn't understand anything. When he calmed down, he realized that he could speak normally. He closed the pendant and returned it to the girl. "It's beautiful. She's very beautiful, and it seems like she's very young," he managed to say with difficulty. Judy nodded. "Yes, very young. Maybe even too young. Or maybe it's just an old photo. Either way, no, it doesn't make it any easier for me. Maybe I should get rid of this pendant. Why do I keep it?" "Well, it's still a part of you, I guess, that's why you don't throw it away. Whatever happened to your mother, maybe she had to leave you for some reason," Robert replied. Judy frowned. "Why do you say that she had to leave me?" "I have a different opinion. No matter what happened, I believe that you shouldn't abandon your child. I also have a difficult life, but I try my best to overcome the difficulties, not without your help, of course. She gave me up. Maybe she had no one to help her either. Maybe she had no one at all. Who would have helped her? No one crossed her path. Someone like me," Robert couldn't finish. He felt a strong wave of emotion. He couldn't speak anymore. Judy continued talking about her mother, but he could hardly hear her. His mind was filled with noise, and he tried to calm himself down. When Judy left the office, Robert let out a barely audible groan and covered his face with his hands. How could this be? How was it possible? What was happening? Or was it all just his imagination? The person in the pendant's photo was his first wife, Valerie. It was definitely her. When they first met, Valerie was 20 years old, but in that photo, she looked a little younger, maybe 16 or 17, but it was definitely her. She was Judy's mother. His beloved wife was the mother of this girl, and he didn't know about it. For some time, he sat in that position, and then he removed his hands from his face. There was a determined expression on his face, as he had decided that he needed to find out the whole truth. Perhaps he was mistaken, and things were not as he had thought. Maybe it wasn't Valerie at all, but someone who resembled her greatly, like a sister. But Robert immediately realized that these were just excuses. It could only be Valerie. Her sister, Leslie, didn't resemble her at all. It was definitely Valerie in the photo, but how did her picture end up in the locket? Maybe it happened by accident, and Robert decided that he needed to find out everything to the end. But he could only clarify everything in one way. Only one person could shed light on the situation. It was his late wife's sister. If anyone knew something, it was only her. Only Leslie was close enough to Valerie. They had no parents, they died early, and Valerie only communicated with Leslie, if anything. If Valerie was hiding something from him and the rest of the world, only Leslie could know it. Robert frowned and opened the drawer of the desk. He took out a worn leather notepad. It contained all the phone numbers that were, or were not, of any use to him. He flipped through the notepad, stopping at a certain page. He stared at the phone number for a few seconds, and then dialed it on his phone. Robert pressed the call button, placed the phone to his ear, and closed his eyes. "I hope she didn't change her phone number," he pleaded. But she hadn't changed her phone number. She answered him. "Hello, Robert." Robert opened his eyes in surprise. "Hello, Leslie. How did you recognize me?" Before he could finish, she interrupted him. "What's there to recognize? You showed up on my caller ID. I didn't delete your phone number." Robert nodded slightly. They had always had a good relationship. After Valerie's death, Leslie had been a great source of support for him. But when he left town to try and forget everything that reminded him of her, he stopped communicating with Leslie. She didn't impose herself on him, wished him a happy birthday for a couple of years, but he didn't respond. She stopped writing to him. Now he felt ashamed of that. "Leslie, please forgive me for..." He started, but he didn't get to finish. Leslie interrupted him again. "I'm glad to hear from you, Robert. How are you doing?" "Everything is fine," Robert replied. "And how about you?" "I'm doing well too." There was a moment of silence. "You didn't call just out of the blue, did you? We haven't talked in so many years. Do you need something?" Leslie asked. "Yes, there's something I need to find out about Valerie." Leslie remained silent for a while. "Leslie, can you hear me?" "Yes, I can. What do you want to know about Valerie?" Robert didn't know how to ask her. After a short pause, he said, "At last, I want to know. Leslie, I want to know about her past before she met me." "Her past?" Leslie was surprised. "But you know everything about her, Robert. You were inseparable, and you know everything about her. What else can I tell you that you don't already know about her? Maybe you can tell me why I found a locket with her picture on a young girl?" "Oh God, it can't be. This can't be. It can't be." "But it's true, Leslie, the eyes of that girl, they resemble Valerie's eyes." "How can that be? Will you explain it to me?" Robert heard Leslie sob. After a minute, she said softly, "I'll tell you everything. Valerie has been gone for a long time. I'm so sorry she didn't live to see this moment. She would. I'll tell you everything, but not over the phone. I'll come tomorrow. You still live there, right?" Robert said, "Goodbye," and hung up the phone. Well, judging by Leslie's reaction, she has something to tell him. Late in the evening, Robert left for Leslie's place by train. It was 11 a.m. when he arrived. When Leslie opened the door, his heart pounded so fast that it was hard for him to breathe. Leslie had hardly changed. She was around 38 now. She had aged well. You couldn't give her more than 32 to 33 years. Maybe it was genetics. Or perhaps Leslie just took good care of herself and her appearance. "Hello, Robert, come in," Leslie greeted him. Robert entered. Due to nervousness, he couldn't utter a word. Leslie realized that he was uncomfortable. "Let's go to the kitchen. I'll make tea first, and then we'll talk." When the tea was ready, Robert regained his composure a bit. He noticed that Leslie was just as anxious as he was. As they sat down, Robert said, "You look good." Leslie smiled and replied, "Thank you, I try." "Have you gotten married?" Leslie shook her head and said, "No, luck isn't on my side. I don't even worry about it. I'm comfortable being alone." Robert's lips quivered. He understood that she was being deceitful. She was lonely but didn't want to admit it. "Leslie, will you answer my question that I asked you over the phone?" Leslie sighed and closed her eyes for a moment. Robert looked at her beautiful face. They were so different from Valerie, but there was still some resemblance between them, especially now that Leslie had grown older. Finally, Leslie opened her eyes and looked at him intently. "I'll tell you everything. It's a secret, our secret with Valerie. No one knows about it. Strangely enough, no one noticed anything. But I still remember every detail." Leslie and Valerie grew up without a father. He passed away when they were very young. Their mother had a tough time. She had to raise 2 children with a 3-year age difference all by herself. She was alone. There was no one to help her. As a result, money was always tight in the family. Mrs. Esther married late in life. She gave birth to Valerie when she was already 35 years old. Leslie was born 3 years later, and her mother lost her husband 3 years after that. At 41, she was left alone with 2 children. Mrs. Esther worked as a teacher in the school where Leslie and Valerie studied. It was difficult to support the girls on a teacher's salary, so she also worked as a tutor on the side. She felt embarrassed to invite students to their small and modest apartment, so she went to the students' homes. She didn't have many students, but the woman tried to save every penny. They lived in a rented apartment because they hadn't had the opportunity to save enough money to buy their own place. So, the woman saved money and wanted to save up for an apartment on her own. It can be said that they lived in poverty, and the girls, especially Valerie, suffered from it. Valerie longed to dress beautifully and wear makeup. When she turned 16, she asked her mom for money to buy lip gloss and mascara, but Mrs. Esther considered it unnecessary spending, and Valerie was very angry with her mom. After some time, Valerie came home with lipstick and mascara one day and told her mom that a friend had given them to her. But Leslie knew it was a lie. Leslie knew that her sister was seeing someone. Usually, the sisters didn't keep secrets from each other. Leslie learned all the secrets of adult life from her sister. Leslie idolized her sister and believed that there was no one closer to her in the world. Valerie also trusted her sister, but when Valerie started staying out after school, Leslie suspected that her sister was hiding something. Leslie observed her for a while and then realized that she was probably right. Valerie seemed too contemplative and mysterious when she came home. "What are you making up?" "Nothing happened to me, I'm fine. Leave me alone, I need to do my homework." They shared one room, and Leslie could see that Valerie struggled to focus on her studies. She was already in the senior year, and she needed to prioritize her education. Their mother constantly reminded her of that, but Valerie had changed, and now something else took precedence over her studies. And then Leslie learned what was happening with her sister. One day, Valerie came home overly excited, and it was evident that something very important had happened to her. She was so overwhelmed that she couldn't hide her emotions. She needed to share it with someone, but she didn't want to share it with her younger sister. However, Leslie already knew what it was about. Leslie's friend had seen Valerie a few days ago, hugging a guy around the waist, and then they kissed. Now Leslie knew that her sister was dating someone. Then one evening, Mrs. Esther went to stay overnight with a friend in the village. Her friend had lost her husband, and Mrs. Esther decided to support her. She left the girls alone, and that same evening, Valerie prepared to go out. She had never gone out so late before or started getting nervous. "Valerie, where are you going?" Leslie asked. "I'm going out with my friends, I'll be back late." "Don't wait for me and don't worry," Valerie replied. But Leslie couldn't stay silent anymore. She felt as if disaster was approaching. "I know where you're going. You have a boyfriend, you're seeing someone, right? You just don't want to tell me." "Fine, don't tell Mom." "But Valerie, why are you keeping everything from me? Haven't we always shared our secrets with each other? Why have you changed so much? Did I do something to offend you?" Valerie initially wanted to protest, but then she sighed and smiled slightly. "I'm sorry, Leslie." "Well, forgive me. It's just that. Well, Yes, I'm dating someone. His name is Travis, he's 28 years old. He's amazing, I'm in love. Leslie, can you imagine, I'm truly in love. He's so wonderful, he's simply the best. He loves me so much, we have so much fun together. You just can't even imagine. Oh God, it's great that I can talk to you about this. I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. It's such torture, I wanted to share it with you," Valerie said with relief. Leslie squinted and asked her, "Why did you keep silent? Why didn't you say anything? What kind of secrets are these?" Valerie lowered her gaze. "You know, it's all Travis. He said he fell so deeply in love with me. And he doesn't want anyone to know about our relationship yet. He said nobody would approve of the age difference between us. He said if my mom finds out I'm dating a 28-year-old guy, she'll separate us. But I don't want to break up with him. He's so caring, kind. I want to be with him. And he said we need to wait until I turn 18, and then we'll tell our parents everything. And then we'll get married. Can you imagine? He wants to marry me." Leslie was shocked. Although she was younger, she understood that her sister had fallen head over heels in love. This guy was way older, and his intentions were unknown. Despite him telling her sister that he wanted to get married, Leslie feared what could happen next. "But have you already, she couldn't finish her sentence. But Valerie understood her. She nodded. "Yes, it's already happened. It was amazing. I couldn't even imagine it would be this amazing. Leslie, I'll tell you everything later. I have to run now." But for some reason, Leslie became very scared. "Valerie. Be careful. I have a bad feeling. I'm afraid for you. I've never seen you like this. I hope nothing bad happens." Valerie understood what Leslie was saying. She approached her sister and hugged her. "My overly sensible younger sister. You understand everything. Everything will be fine, don't worry about me. I'll try to come home not too late so you won't be too worried. And you try not to worry about anything. Just be happy for your sister. It's so great, I've found my love. Leslie, I'm the happiest person in the world. And when I can introduce you to him, you'll see how great he is. You'll like him, you'll see. But right now, I can't introduce you to him. I just ask you, don't tell anyone, not even your friends. In short, don't tell anyone, you understand? I trust you, and even Travis won't know that I told my sister everything." Of course, Leslie promised her that everything would stay between them, but Leslie understood that things were not going as they should. Valerie was experiencing such important feelings, and she had to hide them from everyone. It was clear that Valerie herself was suffering from it. She wanted to shout to the world how happy she was. She had to live her first love in secret, hiding her feelings and emotions. It wasn't right. Even inexperienced Leslie understood that on that day. On that day, Valerie returned around 1 in the morning, and until her sister came home, Leslie couldn't find peace. Valerie came in and immediately went to bed. She didn't tell her sister anything more. Leslie waited for the time when her sister would tell her everything. 2 months passed, and Valerie still hadn't said anything. Valerie was about to finish school soon. She needed to prepare for exams. Taking advantage of their mom being away all the time, Valerie was only busy with outings, and then she started changing before Leslie's eyes. At first, Leslie noticed that her sister stopped smiling. She became pensive and she started going out less. When Leslie asked her about it, she only replied, "It's about Travis. He works, he has an important job, and he's often busy. He told me that everything will change soon, and he'll spend more time with me." When Leslie asked where and what he did for work, Valerie couldn't answer clearly. She mumbled something and then changed the subject. Leslie understood that something was wrong with Travis, but Valerie herself didn't realize it. Perhaps she sensed it, but didn't want to admit it. With each passing day, Valerie was changing more and more. Soon, fear started appearing more frequently on her face. Her meetings with Travis completely ceased. One day, Valerie came home in tears. She fell onto the bed and began to cry. And when Leslie tried to comfort her, it didn't work. Valerie cried for about an hour. Leslie didn't touch her, she waited for her sister to calm down on her own. Touching her was futile. When Valerie calmed down a little, Leslie saw such a strange expression on her face that it frightened her. "Valerie, what happened?" Leslie whispered. Valerie remained silent for a long time, but she had stopped crying. "You look as if someone has died," Leslie whispered. Valerie didn't say anything for a minute, and then she said quietly and resignedly, "Maybe someone will die soon." Her voice was so steady and cold that Leslie became afraid. She felt that some disaster was approaching. "What happened, Valerie?" "You're scaring me," Leslie whispered plaintively. Valerie looked at her sister. There was emptiness in her eyes. She seemed to have aged 10 years in just one day, as if she wasn't 18, but already 28 in a month. "Leslie, Travis left me. He didn't even explain anything, just left me a note saying that he's leaving forever and that I shouldn't look for him." And Leslie let out a sigh of relief. "Well, so he left. So what? What's so special about it? On the contrary, you should be happy." No matter what troubles she would have endured with him. Even though Leslie had never seen him, she felt that it wouldn't end well. Thank God he left her sister alone in time. "Valerie, I'm really sorry you had to go through this. But think about it, maybe it's for the best. Maybe something good awaits you." But Leslie didn't have time to finish. Valerie grabbed her hand so tightly that Leslie held her breath. It was then that she realized that this wasn't the end and that the worst was yet to come. "Leslie, I'm pregnant, do you understand? I'm pregnant, and he left me. He knew I was going to have a baby, and he told everyone. He waited for a long time. He told me he needed to sort some things out, take care of some business. And then we would get married, and everything would be fine. He told me everything would be fine. I believed him, Leslie. I trusted him. And what did he do? He betrayed me. He left me in this mess. And now I don't know what to do. Leslie, I don't know what to do. I want to die." Leslie's eyes widened in horror. She couldn't even imagine such a thing, even in her worst nightmare. Valerie had said that there was nothing to worry about. She had reassured her, saying that everything would be okay. She lied, and now she had acted foolishly under the influence of her emotions. "Valerie, this is terrible. Valerie, what will happen now? What should we do, Valerie? This is just a nightmare. She won't survive this. Yes, she just won't survive this." Leslie whispered in horror. Valerie slowly shook her head. Her face became miserable once again. "She won't find out. No one will know. There won't be a baby. No one will be born. I'll do everything to prevent it, even if I have to kill myself." Leslie immediately started crying. She grabbed her sister's shoulders and shook her, but Valerie didn't react. Valerie. Snap out of it. Don't you dare. What terrible thoughts have entered your mind? I won't allow it. Valerie, can you hear me? If you do something to yourself, I'll die. I can't handle it. And Mom won't be able to handle it either. We'll get through this. Valerie, please, just don't do anything. I beg you, my dear sister, I'm begging you. I'll die without you, Leslie cried. Her crying finally reached Valerie's awareness. Her gaze cleared, and she gently stroked Leslie's crying head. Leslie looked into her sister's eyes and saw her pain. I feel so awful. I feel so terrible, Valerie said. Leslie hugged Valerie. I know, Valerie, I know, but you mustn't do anything like that. I'm afraid of losing you. Don't make things up. We'll figure everything out. Maybe things will still change. Maybe Travis will come to his senses and everything will be fine, but just promise me that you won't do anything. Promise me that you'll stay with us, please. Promise. And Valerie made a promise. She promised not to do anything to herself. Leslie felt slightly relieved. She knew that her sister wouldn't break that promise now. Several days passed. Mrs. Esther knew nothing about her daughter's pregnancy. Valerie didn't say anything. Since the day Leslie had supported her sister and taken her promise not to take any serious actions that would endanger her life, they had talked every day. He can't just abandon everything like that. It's his child, after all. He can't leave me and his future baby. I'm sure he's just scared. Maybe he ran away to think. And when he thinks it through, he'll realize that it's not right. He loves me, and he'll understand that he should come back. We have to get married. Everything will be fine. I'll be turning 18 soon, and we can arrange everything. And no one will say anything. No one can separate us. Valerie constantly repeated this, as if it were a prayer. She seemed to think that by saying it out loud, God would hear her and make everything happen the way she wanted. But Leslie didn't believe in that. From the very beginning, she understood that things weren't as smooth between them. The secret that had surrounded their relationship from the start had nothing to do with love. This despicable guy was probably just toying with her sister. He messed with her mind. And Valerie, poor and naive Valerie, who wanted to grow up quickly, believed everything he told her. Well, now Valerie was involuntarily immersed in the adult life. Valerie started experiencing early morning sickness. Whether it was due to her body's peculiarities or her emotional stress, she constantly felt sick. It was difficult for her to go to school. Sometimes she would go to the bathroom during class. She would feel nauseous, but after composing herself as much as possible, she would return to class, pale and bewildered. Her belly wasn't visible because the pregnancy was still in its early stages. Due to the morning sickness and Valerie's emotional turmoil, she even lost weight. It was scary to admit, but Leslie hoped that she would simply miscarry because it would be the best outcome. Once, a girl secretly told her about her mom's acquaintance. This woman had gotten pregnant by her lover while her own husband was on a business trip. When she found out, she was very worried. She didn't know what to do, and due to the stress, she had a miscarriage. The woman didn't even go to the hospital. She calmly stayed at home for a few days, and then she recovered and went back to work as if nothing had happened. And the woman escaped the danger, and her husband didn't find out. The girl learned all this when her mother told her about it to another friend. Leslie didn't even consider that it would be good if the same thing happened to Valerie. Perhaps they would manage. They could tell Mom that Valerie was just ill. And Leslie would help her if she needed assistance. Leslie was too naive at that time because she was only 15 years old. She couldn't even imagine the consequences a woman could face after having a miscarriage. And it's a good thing that nothing like that happened to Valerie, otherwise, the consequences could have been catastrophic. Days went by, and Valerie began to resemble a ghost. People at school noticed that she didn't look well. The only person who didn't notice was Mrs. Esther because she herself started feeling unwell. Every morning, Mrs. Esther struggled to get up for work. She could barely lift herself out of bed. Her head was pounding, and her body ached as if she had been engaged in heavy physical labor all night long. It felt like she hadn't slept at all, but Mrs. Esther forced herself to get up and go to school. She hoped that this malaise would pass soon. She would attribute it to working too much. Every day, she worked at school and then went to students' homes until late in the evening. And when she returned home, she would barely prepare something to feed the girls, and then she would work on school matters until 1 o'clock in the morning, checking assignments and tests. She rested very little. All of this led to a moment when Mrs. Esther simply couldn't get out of bed. Her body wouldn't obey her, her head was spinning, and she felt nauseous on top of everything. Mrs. Esther called her daughters and said, "I'm feeling really unwell today. I will call and take the day off work. I have some personal days that I can use, and I hope they'll accommodate me. You go to school." Valerie reacted indifferently to her mother's condition. She was too preoccupied with her own situation. However, Leslie was very frightened. Not only was she worried about Valerie, but now she had to worry about her mom too. Her mother's condition troubled her greatly. She had never seen her mom look so unwell. Something was definitely wrong with her. "Mom, maybe you should call a doctor? I don't like how you look." "I think you're sick," Leslie said, sounding concerned. But Mrs. Esther forced a smile and shook her head. "Oh no, sweetheart. Don't worry, everything is fine with me. I'm not sick, nothing hurts. I'm just exhausted, probably. Maybe I caught some kind of virus. Many people are getting sick nowadays. I must have picked something up. Don't worry, I'll lie down, and everything will be fine. I'll take a foot bath. That will immediately make me feel better." But Leslie didn't believe her mother. How could she not be in pain when she was struggling to speak? Something was not right here. They still went to school, and Mrs. Esther was left alone. She thought she would rest a little longer, and then she would feel better. She would get up, have breakfast, make herself a foot bath, drink raspberry tea, and everything would be fine. But nothing went according to her plan. She slept for a few hours, then woke up feeling even worse. She had no strength left. She couldn't even get up. She didn't have breakfast, didn't wash up, didn't make herself raspberry tea or take a bath. Leslie came home earlier than Valerie, and when she saw that her mother hadn't even gotten out of bed, she panicked. "Why haven't you eaten, Mom? Why haven't you gotten up? You're really sick. We need to call a doctor." Mrs. Esther started making excuses, saying that she just decided to lie down, but from her appearance, Leslie understood that her mother had no appetite. She prepared food for her, made tea. She fed her mother, even though she had no appetite, and she hardly ate anything. Then she made her a foot bath. When Mrs. Esther put her feet down from the bed, she felt worse. She felt nauseous. Leslie was very scared. She decided that she would go to the clinic in the morning to call a doctor. But Mrs. Esther said that she could ask the neighbor. She had worked as a nurse in a sanatorium for many years and could help. She knew how to treat any ailment with home remedies. Leslie called the neighbor. The woman was very self-assured. She said that Mrs. Esther was simply having a difficult menopause and that she needed to drink soothing herbs that would alleviate the unpleasant symptoms of her condition. She even gave a packet of medicinal herbs. For several days, Mrs. Esther only drank these herbs because she couldn't eat anything. Over the course of a few days, she looked even worse. Large bruises appeared under her eyes. And then Leslie finally realized that something needed to be done. Of course, she was too young to figure things out on her own. Besides, they all believed the neighbor who considered herself a true specialist. Only later did Leslie realize that they shouldn't have trusted the former nurse from the sanatorium. They should have called a doctor. She ran to the clinic in the morning to call a doctor to come to their home. She explained the whole situation at the reception. The plump lady at the reception snorted at Leslie, muttered that if there was no fever, her mother should have come herself, but she accepted the request. The doctor came in the evening. When the doctor saw Esther, she was horrified. And when she touched her abdomen, she turned pale. She immediately called an ambulance. Mrs. Esther was taken to the hospital. It soon became clear that Mrs. Esther was seriously ill. She had a stage 4 tumor and inoperable growth. Leslie and Valerie had to hear the doctor's verdict. The doctor decided that the girls should know about it too. In just 1 minute, Leslie and Valerie grew up. It was as if they had been plunged into icy water. Valerie even forgot about her own problems. They both realized that an even scarier trial awaited them ahead. The doctor said that their mother's condition was very serious. Surgery would no longer help in the case of such an advanced tumor. There was nothing more that could be done for her. They could try chemotherapy, but the doctor made no promises. There simply was no other treatment. Naturally, their mother found out about it too. She felt as if she was dying but didn't show any sign that it was so serious. Mrs. Esther simply didn't know that the girls knew everything. When they came to her room, she tried to smile. "My dears, by the way, I'm feeling better already. It's good that we came to the hospital after all. The doctor told me that they have already prescribed treatment for me. I'm getting better. Everything will be fine. I'll regain my strength. You'll see, everything will be fine." Leslie was afraid she would cry. She barely held herself together. But Valerie couldn't contain her emotions, leaving her mother at the hospital. The girls returned home, and Valerie said to her sister, "What should we do, Leslie? Mom is so seriously ill. And she doesn't even know that I'm pregnant. I won't tell her now. It will kill her. Oh Lord, Leslie, what should we do?" But Leslie couldn't answer those questions. She didn't know what to do. 2 weeks passed. Valerie turned 18. They didn't celebrate her birthday. There was no time for that. They continued going to school and then going to their mother at the hospital. Mom underwent the first course of chemotherapy, and she felt even worse. With each passing day, she looked worse and worse. Sometimes she slept because they gave her narcotics. Sometimes she struggled to speak, but usually, she just smiled and remained silent. Leslie and Valerie knew that the end was near. There was no hope left. The girls thought their mother wouldn't last long, but she clung to life. Her sick and tormented body still functioned, and then there was some improvement. Mom regained her appetite, and she could do without narcotics. The doctors made no promises, but Leslie and Valerie started to hope that everything would work out. The mother was discharged from the hospital and returned home. She had difficulty getting up and could only make it to the bathroom. She couldn't cook. The girls took on all the household responsibilities. Time passed. Valerie finished school and passed her exams. Her belly became visible, but Valerie concealed it with loose clothing. She had no plans to attend university. She knew it was pointless given her condition. And still, no one knew she was pregnant, even though she was already quite far along. But Valerie's belly wasn't too pronounced. Summer came, and the mother's condition worsened. Within a week, her condition deteriorated to the point where she screamed in pain. She was admitted to the hospital again, and a week later, she passed away. It was a shock for the girls. They were left completely alone. They had no one else, only each other. Fortunately, they had the money their mother had saved to buy an apartment. Since Valerie was already 18, she could handle everything. They buried their mother, and then Valerie became the legal guardian of underage Leslie. Valerie was already in her 8th month of pregnancy. Since she wore loose clothing, no one had realized she was pregnant so far. She never registered for prenatal care or had any medical checkups. She didn't know what to do next. She was just going with the flow. Valerie understood that she needed to pull herself together. She was alone with her sister, who was still in school. They were living in a rented apartment. When their mother's savings ran out, they would have nothing to live on, no money to pay for the apartment. They would end up on the streets. And she would have a baby. it wouldn't get any easier once the baby was born. Valerie wouldn't be able to find a job or apply for benefits. Perhaps no one even knew about her pregnancy. And how would she explain it when she showed up with a baby in her arms? How could she give birth when she had never seen a doctor? What was Valerie thinking before? Leslie couldn't explain why, after their mother's death, she stopped thinking about her sister and stopped caring about her pregnancy. She didn't care what would happen next. She simply understood that their lives were shattered, and nothing good would come from it. Valerie didn't carry the pregnancy to full term, and labor began right on the street while she was returning from the store with groceries. The girl hid herself at an old bus stop, afraid to go outside, enduring the pain without knowing what to do. A passerby heard her cries and called an ambulance. When the paramedic realized that Valerie was in labor, she was taken to the maternity hospital. Of course, she had no documents with her. During the registration process, she gave a random surname and first name, and she was processed without any documents, even though it shouldn't have been done. They took her promise that her relatives would bring the documents. Valerie gave birth to a premature baby girl, but there were no serious complications. During the night, Valerie escaped from the maternity hospital, and none of the staff understood how it had happened. She left only a note stating that she was giving up the baby and left her pendant with a small photo inside. Valerie returned home by dawn. Leslie was horrified when her sister didn't come back home. She realized that something had happened. But when Valerie came and said that the baby was no longer there, Leslie was simply shocked. Valerie didn't get out of bed for a week. She was lucky that there were no complications after childbirth. If something had gone wrong, Valerie would have simply died. Apparently, Valerie had a strong guardian angel. She was young, although she was very afraid of being discovered. She was so afraid of it that she cut her hair and dyed it a different color. She lightened her dark hair, and now she was a short-haired blonde. But Valerie wasn't found. No one came to their house and accused her of giving birth and abandoning the baby under a false name. For several months, Valerie flinched at any sound or knock on the door. Many times, Leslie wondered how it all could have happened, how she could have given birth and escaped, and no one noticed her. Time passed. Leslie continued her studies at school, and her mother's savings were running out. Valerie realized that she needed to find a job, and she quickly found one. She got a job as a saleswoman in a store. She worked in the store for almost 2 years. Valerie was already 20 years old, but she felt like she was 30. She had experienced too much. It seemed to her that her whole life was a continuous tragedy. She had no feelings left for the person who shattered her life by leaving her. She had loved him at first, but then she fiercely hated him, and then it all just disappeared. Nothing remained, as if she had simply erased him from her memory. But she remembered the baby. She remembered that she had given birth prematurely. She thought her daughter had died. And how could a child survive whom the mother had abandoned? He was unwanted by anyone, and Valerie was certain that her daughter was no longer alive. Many times she wondered if she had done the right thing, but every time she convinced herself that she had no choice. She was responsible for her younger sister. Leslie was not to blame for Valerie's mistakes. Leslie should not have to pay for her mistakes. And if Valerie had abandoned the baby, retribution would have been inevitable. They would have ended up on the streets. Leslie would most likely have been taken to an orphanage. And Valerie? Her fate was unimaginable. She would probably have ended her life. Valerie believed that she had done the right thing. She protected her sister at the cost of her own child's life, a child who was never planned. She often talked to Leslie, baring her soul to her, and she cried. Leslie tried to comfort her. And then Valerie forbade herself from remembering the baby and everything that had happened. Otherwise, she would simply lose her mind. And then Valerie met Robert. They met by chance. She liked Robert, but after Travis, she was afraid to start a relationship with anyone. And when Robert started pursuing her, she was confused. She was simply scared. In the end, she confessed everything to her sister. Leslie asked her, "Why are you afraid? Don't you like him?" Valerie thoughtfully replied, "I do like him, very much. He's completely different. He's not afraid to show that he likes me. He comes to the store with flowers. He asks me to go on a date with him. I know I'm not worthy of him. I'm just a saleswoman without education. And he has such prospects, and I'm only 24 years old. He has already achieved so much. I only talked to him once back then, and he told me everything about himself. I understand that he has a wonderful future ahead. And me? I'm broken. Leslie, my soul is in pain. I don't know what I can give him. Why does he need to be with me?" But Leslie had a different opinion. "You have to keep living. You deserve the very best. Thanks to you, everything is going well for me. I want everything to go well for you too." Leslie convinced Valerie to meet Robert again. And when Valerie went on a date with him, she fell in love. Soon after, Robert proposed to her. That evening at home, Valerie had a fit of hysteria. She believed she was unworthy of all this, that she didn't deserve this happiness with Robert. Leslie struggled to calm her down, and she reassured her sister that she was not to blame for anything. If she loved Robert, she should be with him. Valerie agreed to marry Robert. After the wedding, Robert took his wife with him. He offered for Leslie to move in with them, but Leslie was already 18 years old, and she refused to move. She wanted to live in a rented apartment. She planned to find a job to support herself, but Valerie strongly objected. She said she would pay for the apartment and support Leslie, and Leslie should go to university. Leslie enrolled in university. Thanks to her sister's help, she successfully completed her studies and then found a very good job, able to support herself. And a few years later, she was able to buy her own apartment. Valerie lived with her beloved husband. She believed that Robert was her gift from heaven. She worshipped him, and she felt how deeply he loved her. But the thoughts of the child she had abandoned never left her. Her daughter was innocent. She simply paid for the sins of her parents. Valerie could never give her what she would have wanted. Time passed, and Valerie couldn't find peace. When she was 28 years old, Valerie began to remember her daughter more and more often. And one day she told Leslie that she had been to the doctor, and the doctor said that she could never have children again. Something went wrong after the childbirth. If Valerie had stayed in the maternity hospital, perhaps they would have treated her, but she ran away, and the complications from childbirth stayed with her for life. She would never be a mother again. I didn't tell Robert about it. I just can't. He'll start asking questions, and I won't be able to lie to him. I'll have to tell the truth, and he'll resent me for the act I committed. And he'll leave me. He'll abandon me. And I won't be able to bear it. This time, I won't be able to bear it. Because now I truly love him, and I love him very much. I don't want to lose him, Valerie said to Leslie. Leslie understood the torment her sister was going through. Both of them had kept this terrible secret hidden. It was hard for both of them. And then Valerie's daughter started appearing in her dreams, a little girl with a pendant around her neck. Valerie developed an obsessive idea. She decided that her daughter was alive and that she had to find her. She began searching, but all her efforts were in vain. Now Leslie realized how strange it all was. If the pendant had been with the girl all this time, someone should have known about it. Valerie contacted all the orphanages, but no one had heard anything about a child brought in with a pendant around her neck. And Valerie realized that she had lost. She didn't even know if her daughter was alive. And if she was, she would never find her. Perhaps she had already been adopted. And then, that's when Valerie started feeling unwell. Apparently, all these internal struggles led to a serious breakdown in her body. That's when she fell ill, and soon the fatal illness brought her to the grave. Leslie looked at Robert, and Robert didn't even realize tears were streaming down his cheeks. He was shattered. His beloved wife had kept this shameful secret from him for many years. She carried all these burdens within herself. She loved him so much, she was so afraid of losing him that she chose to die rather than be abandoned. But Valerie didn't know that Robert would never leave her if she had just told him. If she had shared everything with him, if she had unburdened her soul, relieved herself of this heavy burden, maybe she would still be alive. Robert would have never left her if he had known the whole story. He would have simply pitied her, comforted her, made her forget about all this horror. He would have made her stop feeling that terrible guilt she experienced. She was so strong and fragile at the same time, but then she broke. She couldn't bear this burden, and that's why she died so young. She was so afraid that even after her death, you would think poorly of her. That's why she made me promise, before her death, that I would never reveal this secret to you. I'm sorry, I just couldn't say anything. I promised her. But since you've learned everything on your own, since you met that girl in some incredible way, you met her. That's why I told you everything. I feel like it's some higher power that brought you together with her daughter. My God, her daughter is alive. Oh my God, my niece, it's a true miracle. Valerie, poor Valerie, she never saw her in her lifetime. But I'm sure she led her to you. She knows everything. God, I can't. Leslie burst into tears. For several minutes, Robert didn't move. He let her cry out her sorrow. She, too, had kept this secret within herself for so many years. Perhaps that's why she hadn't found her happiness. Perhaps that's why she was still alone, because she carried too much unsaid within herself. It didn't give her peace, it didn't allow her to focus. And then Robert returned home. Leslie was left alone. They both decided that Robert would talk to Judy first and tell her everything. Robert came back and immediately decided to talk to the girl. He called her to his office. Judy entered with a smile. When Robert saw her, he understood why he was so drawn to this girl like a magnet. Now Robert looked at her with different eyes, and he saw how Judy resembled her mother. How did he not notice it from the very beginning? But he realized that it was precisely because Judy reminded him of Valerie that he was drawn to her. What happened? Why do you have such a strange expression? Judy asked with concern. Robert struggled to decide how to start the conversation. He was afraid, especially because Judy was pregnant. Who knew how she would react to everything? I need to talk to you, or rather, tell you something. But you have to promise me that you'll try to listen calmly and not start panicking or getting nervous, he said. As soon as he said that, Judy's face changed. It became detached, as if she was ready to hear the worst news in the world. And the resignation on her face made Robert curse to himself. He didn't start the conversation right, not at all as he should have. I understand you well. I promise, I'll be absolutely calm. Are you kicking me out? Judy asked quietly. Robert shook his head immediately. No, nobody's leaving anyone, nobody's dead, nobody's sick, nothing like that. Judy breathed a sigh of relief, but the tension didn't leave her. Then what did you want to tell me? Judy asked a little louder. There's a lot I need to tell you. Oh, God, it's so difficult, Judy, I know who your mother is. Silence hung in the air. Judy turned pale. Robert took her hand. And who is she? How did you find out? I don't understand, Judy whispered. Before I tell you who it is, you have to promise me one thing. What? Judy's voice was audible. Please, before drawing any conclusions, listen to me. I'll tell you everything. I'll tell you everything I learned from your biological aunt. Aunt? I have a biological aunt? Judy said in astonishment. Robert nodded and told Judy everything. He told her that his first wife Valerie, who died so early, was her mother. And he shared with Judy everything he learned from Leslie. He told her everything as Leslie herself had told him, and he explained to the girl why she ended up in the orphanage and what her mother had been thinking. They had always been searching for her, but they couldn't find her, and in Valerie's final moments, she thought about the girl she left at the maternity hospital, the girl she gave life to but couldn't raise due to known reasons. Judy cried, but it all went better than Robert had anticipated. He was afraid that she would have a hysterical reaction, but it didn't happen. Judy's life had been too difficult, and she had become accustomed to unpleasant events. The story about her mother was unpleasant and painful. Judy felt immense relief. Now she knew who she was, and she knew how she came into this world, and she knew the reasons that led the unfortunate girl to leave her child in an orphanage. Her mother was alone too, and she couldn't cope. And now Judy wasn't so sure if she could have handled everything without meeting Robert. She was simply lucky. When Robert finished telling the girl, he took out a large box of photographs. They were pictures of him and Valerie. For several hours, Judy examined each photograph. Tears continued to flow down her cheeks, but Robert saw the happiness in her eyes, knowing that she finally knew who she was. Then Robert called Leslie and told her that Judy wanted to talk to her. Leslie immediately started crying. He barely managed to calm her down, and then Judy took the phone, and as soon as they heard each other's voices, they both burst into tears again. Robert sat beside Judy, holding her hand. Leslie said she would come the next day to meet her niece in person. When Judy asked why she hadn't come right away, Leslie replied, "I was afraid you wouldn't want to see me. I was afraid you would never forgive your mother, my sister, for what she did. I was so afraid you would spit in my face." Judy sobbed and replied, "How could I? You're the only family I have, and I've always longed for a family member, and now I have the opportunity. I can't even express how happy I am. How could you think I wouldn't want to see you?" And the next day, Leslie arrived and met her niece. When she saw her, she almost fell to her knees in front of her, and then they hugged tightly and cried for a long, long time. And then they couldn't stop talking. Robert wanted to leave them alone, but Judy said he could stay because he was considered a family member too. He brought her back to life and reunited her with her mother, even though she was no longer alive. Robert and Leslie took Judy to her mother's grave. Judy sat at her grave for a very long time, stroking the image on the tombstone and saying something, sometimes laughing, and sometimes wiping away tears. Robert and Leslie sat in the car all that time, and then the girl calmed down and kissed the image of her mother. She told her everything she wanted to say. Leslie wanted Judy to move in with her, but Robert was against it. Leslie still hadn't settled her personal life. If Judy moved in with her, Leslie would dissolve in her cares. And when a child was born, she would be consumed with caring for the baby. Robert wanted Leslie to find her own happiness. Now she was free from everything that had oppressed and held her back. Now she could breathe freely and simply enjoy life. Judy shared the same opinion. She said she would often visit, but she wanted to live with Robert because she loved him like her own father. In essence, she considered him her father because no one had ever done for her what he did. Robert also treated her as his own daughter. He didn't have children of his own. He and Valerie didn't have children, but Valerie gave him her own daughter, whom she couldn't find in her lifetime but directed to him after her death. Robert believed in higher powers and knew that he and Judy didn't meet by chance. It was incredible. Now Judy was happy. She had found a family. She no longer worked for Robert, although she wanted to help around the house. Still, he was categorically against it. He hired another assistant, and Judy became a member of the family. Now Robert was not alone. Now he had a daughter. And soon Judy gave birth to a son, whom Robert considered his grandson. The boy was born on time and perfectly healthy, and he resembled his grandmother. He had the same eyes as hers. Judy named the boy Frank. Robert himself picked them up from the maternity ward. He didn't want any grand gestures or formalities. They were all so happy, they wanted to shout it to the world. Robert had never felt so happy before. No, he was happy with Valerie when they were married, when she was alive. Frank in his life was something miraculous and extraordinary. He only thought about the boy. He knew that now he wasn't afraid of being alone. Now he had a family. It was the best thing that could have happened to him. If anyone asked him if he wanted to change anything in his life, of course, he would want his wife to be alive, but then he would never have met Judy, and it's unknown what would have happened to the girl. Perhaps she would have repeated her mother's fate with her death. Valerie broke this chain of tragic events. Soon Robert was strolling in the courtyard of his mansion with a stroller. There was a smile on his face. He looked at the sleeping face of the boy whom he planned to make his heir, and he thought about Valerie. Robert was sure she saw everything, that she was also happy. Her soul was at peace, and he mentally thanked her for making him happy even after her death.
An amazing story, isn't it? Thank you for listening till the end. I sincerely hope that you truly enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and rate this video. See you in the comments and in new releases.